This is my field notes talk on my Sicily tour. I was able to travel to Sicily for a week in October after my Dolomites tour in September, and was able to just spend some time doing some research, meeting vendors, trying out new restaurants, and traveling around the island, just sort of trying out the itinerary as I have planned it for next September. There are, I believe, 3 spots left in this tour. I would love for people to consider joining me. It was great kind of reconnecting with Sicily here. It has really kind of taken off in popularity in the last 5 years or so, especially after the pandemic. It was already trending this way before the pandemic, and now it's a popular place for travelers to come and just experience this just rich history that exists on this Mediterranean island, the keystone of the Mediterranean. So many civilizations having passed through Sicily. So, you know, these kinds of research trips are important for us for just keeping tabs on things. And, you know, I'd love to tell you all of my new discoveries in Sicily, like this awesome high view here at a new rooftop terrace that I discovered. But today I really want to focus on 3 things that relate to what I think is so great about Sicily in general, and that would be just the culture of art and creativity. So I want to tell you about this artisan craft movement that is happening and has been happening in Palermo, the big capital port city of Sicily. And then I want to check in and tell you about ancient ruins. There are amazing cities from antiquity all over Sicily, from the Greek history to the Phoenician history, which is what I want to focus on. And so we're going to talk about the lost Phoenician city of Mozia. And then I want to check in about Sicilian agriculture. So we'll talk a little bit about the wine industry on the north side of Mount Etna. There's a lot to say, but I want to focus on these things here for today. So the artisan revival in Palermo. So Palermo is just this thriving port city. There's just lots of people coming. The city has been booming in the last few decades. As people are moving back into Palermo and discovering all of its sort of art and culture. Palermo has this reputation for being a very kind of gritty port city. You walk around Palermo and you just get this amazing sense of kind of grit and grime. This is just a typical picture from a random street in Sicily. In Palermo, you see scenes like this everywhere. And there's this kind of sense in Palermo that goes back centuries where there are these wonderful buildings, beautiful works of architecture that are completely neglected on the exterior and then are absolutely immaculate and beautiful on the interior. And so there's this sense of kind of letting things kind of decay to sort of on the outside to mask all the beautiful sort of treasures that you find inside. So Sicily has this kind of long, now impoverished, but once thriving aristocracy. So there's these great palace houses all over Palermo, like you see here. Point being here that there's a long tradition of employing artisan crafts people, producing all kinds of wonderful things, all kinds of different materials. And here you see just even in architectural decoration, even if this palace has been long decaying in the last 100 years or so. Here's a shot of just a typical shop. So lots and lots of small shops on the dense streets of Palermo. Lots of people making things. There's this long history of craft in the city, but it has changed in the last couple of generations. You know, Palermo has this reputation for being the home of the Sicilian mafia. And I'm reluctant, of course, to bring this up in the beginning of any talk about Sicily, because Sicily has moved on from its mafia legacy in so many ways. But I wanted to show this image here of General George Patton entering into the gates of Palermo during World War II. In July 1943, when the Allies crossed from North Africa and entered Sicily, the plan was for the British to land on the East Coast and move their way up towards Messina, for the Americans to land in the southern central coast and to kind of protect the left flank of the British as the Italians and the Germans that had come to support them were retreating back towards Messina to bridge across to the mainland boot of Italy. And Patton very controversially diverted from that plan and went to Palermo. And there's lots of historians weighing in on why he may have done this. But one thing that you learn on the tour, when we go to the World War II Museum in Catania, is that Italians are convinced that Patton did this to set up contacts with essentially the mafia, who was the primary resistance force against the fascist leaders that had come into power in Sicily in the previous 2 decades. So as the Allies are taking over Sicily, they were essentially deposing the Italians, the fascist government, and the Germans, and they were essentially appointing mafia leaders to become mayors of big cities and small towns all over Sicily. And whether that was intentional or not, it brought short-term stability to Sicily after the war, but it also brought this long-term pain of putting mafia leaders into positions of power during the post-war redevelopment period. And so this created this long legacy of the mafia controlling business, controlling industries, construction, agriculture, shipping, material harvesting, you name it, the mafia controlled everything in the mid-20th century, until the Sicilians started to rise up and really fight against mafia control of the economy and the streets in the 1990s. And great progress has been made since then in kicking out the mafia. So since the 90s, really, Palermo has been a very safe and welcoming city. The crime rate has gone down, violent crime rate has gone down dramatically since the 1980s. Murder rate fell by 90%, I read, which is actually really remarkable if you think about it. And so now Palermo is one of the great kind of secondary cities of Europe, really. And one of the things that has helped kind of push Palermo's reputation is this organization that supports local artists and craftspeople in helping them come back into the city and find studio space, find shops, find a place to do their work and to sell and market their work. And so there's this great organization called ALAB, is an acronym for the Free Association of Artisans and Artists in Belarm. Belarm is the ancient name of Palermo, goes back to the Arabic period from 1,200 years ago. And so this association supports some 200 plus artists. It's growing all the time. There are 50 studios that are in this kind of network of artisans, and they make all sorts of things on a small scale. So some of the studios are just one person. Some of them are kind of a group of artists, but they're making all kinds of leather things, everything handmade. They're doing ceramics. They often have a studio in the back of the shop, and they're super welcoming. They love getting visitors. If you approach and talk to them, they are super eager to talk about their work and their business. And so this kind of alliance, this federation of artists has really kind of taken off. And here's a ceramic shop, and there's this great quote here that creativity is seeing something that does not yet exist. And so these young artisans are sort of taking, their Sicilian culture and heritage and this long tradition of producing, just the most beautiful crafts, and are reviving it in a kind of new and modern way with this ALAB Alliance. There is a website that you can check out that has all of these artists and shops listed on it. You can browse through. They have an Italian version and an English version. And if you're interested at all in kind of handmade things, really well-made kind of one-off pieces, then this is a great place to do a little research before you go. They've got a map showing where all the shops are. And of course, you know, you might not like everything that is produced, but they produce such a wide range of things that often I think people will find something that they're interested in and just kind of make a note to visit one or two of these shops and go and check it out. And so there's this great movement of artists coming back into Palermo, taking advantage of relatively affordable rents in a big port city. Obviously, prices are increasing now as Palermo's getting kind of gentrified, but in the last 10, 20 years, Palermo has been much more affordable compared to other big cities in Italy. And then another artisan craft tradition is actually not new, but deserves a mention. These are the famous nuns at the Church of St. Catherine of Alexandria, right in the heart of Palermo. It's an incredible church, but also a whole monastic complex. And around the side of the church, you'll find a small doorway that is open and often has a line of people waiting to get in. And this place has really taken off. It was popular before the advent of social media, but social media has really propelled it. And this is kind of a must-stop place to visit in Palermo, as the nuns at this church are producing incredible Sicilian sweets. They do desserts. So they do proper Sicilian cannoli. I don't have a huge sweet tooth, but I can't pass up the chance to get a proper cannoli. And you can see here that they are filling the cannoli shells with the sweetened ricotta cream to order. So there's always, you know, several dozen people crammed into this pastry shop run by these nuns. They're quite serious about their work, so you kind of have to know what you want when it's your turn to order. But you get all manner of beautiful, wonderful Sicilian sweets, and then your cannoli you kind of want to eat right away. So there's a beautiful courtyard inside the monastery, the beautiful garden and a fountain, and just the perfect place to kind of enjoy this treat. Malzia. This is an ancient lost Phoenician city that is an archaeological site now, and is, I think, really important to visit. It's a place that I want to incorporate into my tour because so much of our understanding of the ancient world comes from the history of ancient Greece and the history of ancient Rome. And in Sicily, you actually have a third superpower that was operating in the Mediterranean starting in 800 years before Christ, or before the Common Era. And so this is, of course, the Phoenician territory of North Africa, made most famous by the city-state of Carthage. And you've heard of Carthage before because the the Carthaginian general, Hannibal, fought against the Romans in the 3rd century of before the Common Era, and inflicted much damage to ancient Rome. But Malzia was an important Phoenician city-state that had an important trading relationship with Carthage. You can see the map here. We've got you see Sicily there in the middle of the map, sort of the keystone of the Mediterranean, and then you see the city of Lilybaeum, which was the city that came right after Malzia, because Malzia was established for some 400 years and then was defeated, and the neighboring city of Lilybaeum became important. So it's basically at the same location. Lilybaeum today is called Marsala. And so it's just a short sail across the Sicilian Straits to the north coast of Africa and Carthage. So today, a visit to Malzia is fascinating because of this Phoenician ancient history, but also because of the archaeological site on the original location of the city, which is an island inside a protected lagoon. The lagoon provided a source for harvesting salt. That was an important part of the establishment of Moltsia and an important part of the industry there. And also a causeway, an ancient causeway was built across the lagoon, the shallow lagoon, that provided a way to get carriages from the mainland out onto the island. So the lagoon provided a kind of natural harbor, natural protection, but it also provided resources that could be traded. So the Phoenicians established an outpost here that eventually grew into an important market town and quite a powerful town. They would eventually capture the surrounding territory for tending the fields and for growing the wheat and the agriculture that was needed to send back to Carthage to feed that much bigger city-state. And so Moltsia became rather wealthy and prosperous. Here is an artist's drawing of what Moltsia looked like. It's a small island. It's about a half-mile long by a quarter-mile wide. And in the latter half of its 400 years of history, there was a defensive wall around the perimeter after Moltsia was attacked. They built up defenses, and some of those defensive walls are still visible today on a visit. And I want to talk also here about the legacy of the Greek historian Thucydides and also Herodotus, who were two of the most important historians of the 5th century before the Common Era Peloponnesian War. And much of what we know about Moltsia and the Phoenicians in general comes from Thucydides especially, and these two writers writing in the 400s before Christ. And so Thucydides talks about the Peloponnesian War and how that gets diverted to Sicily. He mentions Moltsia. He also describes the ancient peoples that existed before the Greeks and the Phoenicians arrived in Sicily. We're not sure exactly how he knows that because he's writing about people that preceded him by some 500 years. But Thucydides is still very important today because he was one of the first people to write about the idea of an objective history that dives into the motives and the reasons and the rationales behind the actions of the humans that caused great historical events. Herodotus was before Thucydides, and Herodotus talked about the actions of men, but also rationalized it with the influence of the gods. Thucydides did none of that, and he was trying to find something more objective. So he writes about Western values and democracy, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that wars were fought more out of trying to just trying to exercise power rather than trying to implement moral ideas. And so there's this kind of contradiction in Thucydides in this idea of finding an objective history, but also just men fighting out of a desire to exercise power. And there's a kind of conflict with those ideas. And so Thucydides is still very much studied today. He's widely read by historians and also people working in international relations. And I think that since most of what we know about Moltsia comes from this writer, it's interesting, I think, to one, visit Moltsia and to try to kind of peel back, this idea of history being written by the winners. Thucydides was an ancient Greek. They would eventually come to dominate the island. And so here we are trying to learn about the Phoenicians through an important Greek writer who is biased, right, in having a Greek perspective, but also claiming to be more objective. So that I think makes Moltsia worth the trip. And when you go and visit today, much of the island was, of course, buried by the lagoons and the surging seas and sediments left behind in the lagoon over the centuries. And today it has been excavated starting the early 1900s. Joseph Whitaker is a wealthy aristocratic British businessman who came to be involved in the Marsala wine industry in Western Sicily. He bought the island of Mozia, so it's privately owned. He planted vineyards, and he also understood that there were important ancient ruins on the island, and so he began funding the archaeological excavations. It's a wonderful place to go and visit today. It's a wonderful walk around the island. It's very idyllic. And it has these kind of ruins that are scattered around. Much of what we know about the Phoenicians comes from archaeological excavations that have to be kind of considered with what was left behind, the writings left behind by Thucydides and others about the Phoenicians, but have also provided a source of knowledge about them independent. So you see pretty low-lying ruins, but with the help of excellent local guide, we go through and we kind of identify different parts of the city and different time periods and different, in this case, building techniques with these walls that were made of these vertically stacked stones, kind of erected like pillars and then filled in, which was a different construction technique than the Romans. Here you see that in the wall behind the stair. So the Phoenicians have a kind of notorious reputation in history. Many later historians talked about atrocities by the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, and kind of horrible sort of human sacrifices that may or may not have happened. They left behind no written record, so we don't have their voices of their perspective. We just have the voices of the people that conquered them and later historians kind of repeating those biases. The artistic treasure on Mozia is this sculpture of what was once thought to be a charioteer is now just called the Beautiful Youth. It's an amazing piece. It is a contemporary of the famous Delphi chariot, bronze statue from 5th century before Christ. And then nearby there is this amazing ship, this Phoenician ship that was unearthed outside of Mozia in a museum. Here's a model showing the eventual sack and siege of Mozia when the island declined and fell into ruin. It's an interesting model of how ancient armies would outlast and eventually penetrate defensive walls. And then I want to also finish up by talking about the wine industry at Etna Nord. Mount Etna is on the far side of the island. It's an 11,000-foot, very active volcano. It erupts frequently with relatively low-intensity eruptions, and so there's all kinds of cities and establishments, farms, and agriculture that happens around Mount Etna. Nearby is Taormina. That's where we're going on the tour. Taormina is a very famous place and has been discovered. And so for one of the days in Taormina, we will get out of town and we will travel about an hour away to the north slope of Mount Etna, which is very idyllic and is famous for 2 indigenous grapes that are cultivated and used to produce wine, the Nerello Muscalese, which is very similar to kind of Pinot Noir, and the Caricante white grape. We'll also stop off for an almond milk. This is traditional Sicilian almond milk. The almonds grow so well there. It's sweetened, it's frothed in the cafes, and this is a specialty that you can get in the small towns on the slope of Mount Etna. We'll be here in the fall visiting wineries and then traveling up Mount Etna. You can see here there's this is a place called Piano Provenzano where you can drive up a parking lot, and then from there they do these incredible tours in these kind of 4x4 buses that are like these amazing machines that drive further up the mountain and give you a closer view of the of the summit. You don't get quite to the summit of Mount Etna, of course, it's restricted. We'll go to the nearby town of Randazzo, which is this beautiful kind of peeling plaster kind of town with this really great cathedral built of volcanic lava stone, that is. And then we'll taste the grapes, of course, that produce the wine. There are over 100 wineries now on the north slope of Etna. And they are taking advantage of the mineral soil, and they have this really good sort of volcanic mineral-y wine that has all kinds of opportunities for a kind of wide spectrum of tastes. And this is the Caricante, goes really well with seafood. Whoops, there we go. That's the Norella Mascalese, the Etna Red. The local indigenous grape, and pairs well with heartier food. All right, I want to wrap up. There's so much going on in Sicily. It's just such an exciting and rich, dense place to travel. There's so much more to say, but I just wanted to do a couple of highlights of things that I focused on my recent research trip. And if you're interested, get in touch with me. If you have questions, otherwise, I'll hope to see you in Sicily next year.